In a world where shadows hide the truth, one man dared to step into the light. For decades, Africa's destiny was written in foreign capitals, its leaders silenced, its people left to suffer. But when whispers of a weapons plot began to surface, the silence was shattered. Ibrahim Traoré, soldier, son of Burkina Faso, and a leader forged in fire, would uncover secrets powerful enough to shake the very foundations of global power. This is not just a story of betrayal and hidden deals. It is the story of courage, of resistance, and of a continent rising against the unseen hand that tried to control its fate. Stay with us and witness the moment Ibrahim Traoré broke the silence. If this story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold truths. In the dead of night, beneath a desert sky filled with silence and dust, a convoy crept across the forgotten edges of Burkina Faso. Its headlights were muted, its wheels muffled by layers of cloth wrapped tight to silence their grind. Inside, the armored trucks lay crates not filled with food, medicine, or hope, but with weapons. Rifles wrapped in plastic, rocket launchers sealed in grease, and boxes stamped with codes that traced back not to rebels, not to smugglers, but to something larger, something hidden in the folds of global power. It was here, in the emptiness of the Sahel, that a secret worth $700 million first revealed itself in whispers of smoke and steel. The people of Burkina Faso did not see these convoys, though they felt their consequences. Villages that had once hummed with the voices of children awoke to the stench of burning thatch and the echoes of gunfire. Farmers turned their tools into makeshift weapons, not to defend their crops, but to defend their lives. And always, the question hovered, where did these weapons come from? Who is fueling this shadow war in a land already bruised by hunger and despair? In the capital, Ibrahim Traoré carried the burden of these questions like iron shackles around his chest. Still young, still carrying the weight of Thomas Sankara's legacy in his very posture, he stood in his military uniform and red beret, knowing that every decision pulled him deeper into storms he did not choose. Burkina Faso was starving, yes, but more dangerous than hunger was the invisible hand, turning his soil into a battlefield. And when whispers began to name a number, $700 million, the truth sharpened like a blade. This was not ordinary smuggling. This was not ragged rebels trading stolen rifles for scraps of gold. This was an operation of scale, of precision, of contracts hidden in foreign banks and supply chains that stretched across oceans. To the world, Burkina Faso was poor, fragile, insignificant. But in the silence of embassy halls, in the coded language of diplomats, Traoré began to see a different picture. His land was being used as a chessboard in a game of empires. And somewhere in the shadows of that game was the United States. The setup began slowly, like a storm seen first on the horizon. A shipment intercepted by chance, crates washed up near a dry riverbank, the serial numbers scratched out but still traceable to factories thousands of miles away. A soldier found dead near a border post, his uniform marked not by bullets but by silence, an execution disguised as accident. And then, an envelope delivered to Traoré's desk, unmarked, carrying photographs of coded messages intercepted from satellite relays. Messages that spoke of deliveries secured, of funds released, of operations grit. At the bottom of the page, a signature blurred, but bearing the faint seal of a foreign defense contractor. The people knew nothing of this. They only saw their suffering deepen. Mothers wailed in empty huts where children once slept. Fathers buried their sons in shallow graves, the land too dry to give them proper rest. The price of bread soared, the rivers dried, and still the guns multiplied in the hands of rebels who were once starving peasants but now carried modern weapons with unnatural confidence. Inside the presidential palace, shadows grew longer. Traoré Saids whispered in cautious tones, some urging silence, others pressing for truth. Among them, a loyal officer placed a folder on his desk and whispered, "These weapons, they are not meant for the rebels alone. They are meant for you, to corner you, to break you." The words hung heavy, like ash in the air. The more Traoré uncovered, the clearer it became. This was no coincidence. The influx of weapons was designed not to win battles, but to destabilize, to fracture his government from within. His nation, still fragile, was being prepared like dry timber for a fire lit by unseen hands. And the whispers of American involvement grew louder. Not directly, never directly, but through contractors, through third-party nations, through the invisible web of deals that allowed deniability. And yet, the pieces did not fully connect. There was money, yes, but whose account held it? There were weapons, yes, but who signed the order? There were rebels, yes, but who gave them training, strategy, and maps of the land they once stumbled through blindly? Each clue brought him closer to the edge of a truth, too dangerous to hold, too sharp to carry without bleeding. But with every revelation came betrayal. A general once loyal to him began spending long nights in the company of foreign envoys. An aide disappeared with classified documents, leaving no trace but the sound of car tires vanishing into the night. And rumors spread that the very walls of his palace carried ears, listening, recording, feeding every word back to someone beyond the Atlantic. The ultimatum was unspoken, but clear. Stay silent and survive. or speak and risk everything. For Ibrahim Traoré, silence had never been an option. As thunder rolled across the desert and lightning split the skies, he stood at the edge of revelation. Beneath his boots lay a folder filled with undeniable proof, contracts signed in secret, bank transfers routed through shell companies, cargo manifests marked with American initials, proof of a $700 million plot that could not be hidden forever. And so, with the storm pressing close and betrayal breathing down his neck, Ibrahim Traoré faced a decision that would either bury him or carve his name into history. What he uncovered next would shake the foundations of global power. The storm did not break in thunder alone. It came in whispers, in coded transmissions, in the cold weight of truths hidden under layers of secrecy. As Ibrahim Traoré sat with the folder of evidence before him, he knew what he held was more than paper. It was a mirror reflecting the invisible hands that had shaped his country's misery. Days turned into weeks, and each hour peeled away another layer of the conspiracy. His intelligence officers, working in the shadows, traced shipments across oceans. Cargo routes disguised as humanitarian aid revealed themselves as pipelines of destruction. Containers marked medical supplies carried crates of rifles. Shipments labeled infrastructure equipment carried parts for drones. The numbers did not lie. The worth of it all approached $700 million, a sum too vast to be the work of mere smugglers. And still, the people suffered. The markets of Ouagadougou echoed with emptiness. Children begged for crumbs outside bakeries that had nothing to give. Mothers carried water for miles, only to watch their children die of thirst before reaching home. Men lined up at recruitment stations, not out of patriotism alone, but out of desperation to earn a piece of bread, a day of shelter. And when rebels attacked villages with weapons more advanced than the state itself could provide, the despair turned into fury. Traoré felt it deep within his bones. This was not chance. Someone wanted his people broken, starved, desperate enough to turn against him. And if they succeeded, his government would crumble, not under the weight of rebellion, but under the collapse of faith. The whispers in the palace grew louder. Generals argued in hushed voices, some warning that the truth was too dangerous to confront, others secretly feeding information to unknown masters. A mysterious envoy arrived at the American embassy, his presence explained as routine, his visits too frequent to be chance. At night, black cars drove through empty streets, windows tinted, destinations unknown. The rising action came like a noose, tightening. First came the intercepted radio message. It was short, clinical, delivered in English, but with codes familiar. 2 military contractors. It spoke of Phase 2 deployment and targets secured. No names, no locations, but enough to suggest a plan bigger than scattered arms deliveries. Then came the photographs, grainy images, captured by a young soldier who risked his life near a border town. They showed a hidden warehouse, its walls stacked with crates of ammunition. On one crate, faint under a smear of mud, a marking stood out, the initials of a U.S. defense contractor, blurred but unmistakable. But the most chilling revelation came not from evidence, but from betrayal. One night, as Traoré studied the documents alone, a shot rang out in the distance. His guards scrambled, boots pounding through the palace halls. Minutes later, they returned, carrying the lifeless body of one of his closest aides, the man who had first warned him of the weapons plot. The aide's throat had been cut, his blood still warm, his eyes frozen in a stare that seemed to whisper, "They are closer than you think." It was then that Traoré realized the conspiracy had already penetrated his walls. Whoever orchestrated the $700 million arms plot had ears inside his government, hands inside his circle, knives aimed at his back. The pressure mounted from outside as well. Letters arrived, diplomatic but sharp, urging Burkina Faso to remain aligned with international partners. Foreign envoys offered veiled warnings. Silence will bring stability. Exposure will bring ruin. Aid packages were promised in one breath, threatened to be withdrawn in the next. To the world, these were the negotiations of politics. To Traoré, they were chains. Meanwhile, ordinary people bore the weight of it all. Villages were raided, crops destroyed, children conscripted into rebel groups that somehow never ran out of bullets. The contradiction tore at the nation's soul. Rebels were poor, starving, and desperate, yet their weapons gleamed as if forged yesterday in the factories of distant nations. Mothers buried their children with hands trembling from both grief and hunger. Soldiers at the front lines fought with rifles decades old, only to be outgunned by peasants carrying American-made assault weapons. Suspicion spread among the ranks. Soldiers wondered aloud whether their generals were selling them out. Some deserted, unwilling to fight a war where the enemy's weapons spoke louder than their own. And in the streets of Ouagadougou whispers spread. Is our leader next? Will Traoré be betrayed like Sankara? Will he, too, fall under the shadow of foreign hands? Still, he pressed forward. In secret meetings with loyal officers, he laid out maps dotted with weapons caches, contracts traced through shadow companies, and testimonies from survivors. His voice, calm yet firm, carried the weight of inevitability. This is not a war of rebels. This is a war of empires disguised in our soil. But the deeper he dug, the darker the revelations became. Satellite images revealed airstrips where no airports should exist. Trucks carried supplies across borders at night, guarded not by ragged rebels but by men in uniforms without insignias. In one intercepted transmission, a voice spoke in calm American English. The assets are in place. Phase 3 can proceed. Every clue brought him closer to the heart of the storm. Every revelation confirmed what he already feared. This was no isolated plot. This was a carefully orchestrated destabilization of his nation, funded by $700 million, shielded by the deniability of contractors and intermediaries, and the thread, once followed far enough, led to Washington. The climax of Act 2 came with a single discovery. In a small town near the Malian border, a warehouse was raided by Traoré's soldiers. Inside they found weapons worth millions. Rifles, drones, explosives. But more damning than the weapons themselves was the document found hidden in a metal case. It was a contract written in cold, bureaucratic language, detailing the transfer of arms through a shell company. At the bottom, faint but undeniable, was a seal, a subcontractor tied to a major U.S. defense corporation, that it was the missing link. The undeniable proof that American fingerprints, if not directly, then through their shadow networks, were on the weapons flooding his country. But proof was not safety. That very night, an explosion ripped through the outskirts of Ouagadougou. A munitions depot erupted in flames, painting the sky red. Dozens died, their bodies torn apart not by chance, but by precision. It was a warning. A message to Traoré: stay silent, or this will be your fate. The tension had reached its breaking point. He could no longer ignore the truth, but neither could he reveal it without risking collapse. To speak was to challenge an empire. To remain silent was to betray his people. And so, as the smoke from the explosion still hung over the city, Ibrahim Traoré stood at the edge of decision, knowing that the world itself was watching, even if it did not yet know it. The rising storm was no longer avoidable. The trap had been set. The betrayal was real. The weapons had been traced. And the choice before him was no longer survival. It was sacrifice. The city had not slept since the explosion. Smoke hung over Ouagadougou like a veil of mourning, and whispers filled the streets like restless ghosts. The people demanded answers, but all they received were fragments, half-truths, rumors, shadows. Some said the rebels had struck the depot. Others swore it was foreign sabotage. But in the heart of the palace, Ibrahim Traoré knew the truth more than anyone. The evidence in his possession was no longer abstract. It had teeth, claws, and the power to destroy him if mishandled. The contract linking the weapons to an American defense subcontractor was undeniable, yet to release it meant war with forces far larger than Burkina Faso. To hold it meant submission, silence, and complicity. Inside the dimly lit war room, the atmosphere was suffocating. His most trusted officers sat around the heavy wooden table, maps spread before them, the smell of smoke still lingering from the night before. Their faces were carved with fatigue, their uniforms wrinkled from sleepless nights. One of them, Colonel Traoré, leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "Excellency, if we reveal this, the world will turn against us. Washington will deny it. Paris will condemn us. Aid will vanish overnight. Our borders will collapse. Is this the hill we choose to die on?" Another officer, younger and burning with defiance, slammed his fist on the table. "And if we stay silent, then we are no better than accomplices. Every rifle that kills a Burkinabe child will bear our shame. The people already doubt us. Do you want them to believe their leader is just another pawn?" The tension thickened. Each man in that room felt the weight of history pressing down upon them. They all knew the ghosts of the past. They knew what had happened to Thomas Sunk when he had dared to dream too loudly. They knew how swiftly foreign powers turned heroes into corpses, and corpses into warnings. Traoré sat silently, his hands folded, his red beret casting a shadow across his eyes. He did not speak for a long while. When he finally did, his voice was calm, but it carried the tone of inevitability. "This is no longer about survival. It is about dignity. If we are to fall, we will fall standing. And if we are to rise, it will not be by begging crumbs from those who bleed us dry. The truth has already chosen us. The question is not whether we reveal it. The question is whether we are ready to face the storm it brings." The room fell into silence. Even the hum of the ceiling fan seemed to pause. His words were not the thunder of a speech, they were the steady march of fate. But betrayal, silent and patient, was already seated among them. That same night, as the war council adjourned, a shadow slipped from the palace. A general, his face hidden in the dark, his steps heavy with treachery, made his way to an unmarked car. Inside waited a man with pale skin and cold eyes, his accent foreign, his presence unmistakable. The general handed over a flash drive, its contents stolen from the war room. "The president has proof," the general whispered. "Tomorrow, he plans to act." The foreigner nodded, his expression unreadable. Then tomorrow, he must be silenced. Meanwhile, inside the palace walls, Traoré prepared for the unthinkable. He ordered his loyal soldiers to secure the evidence, making multiple copies, hiding them in locations known only to a select few. He arranged for messages to be sent across Africa, encrypted transmissions carrying fragments of the truth. If he fell, he wanted the world to know why. The hours before dawn were the longest. The palace was wrapped in shadows, the silence broken only by the distant sound of boots on stone and the occasional hum of a generator. Traoré paced his chambers, the weight of history pressing down upon his shoulders. He thought of Sun, of Lumumba, of Nkrumah, men who had dared to defy the tide of empire and who had paid with their lives. He wondered if his own name would be carved next into that stone of sacrifice. But as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire, he made his decision. He would speak, not in whispers, not in shadows, but openly, with the clarity of a man who no longer feared death. The announcement came suddenly, carried across radio waves and flickering television screens. The president of Burkina Faso would address the nation that evening. Across villages and cities, people gathered. Around radios, their faces etched with hunger and anticipation, soldiers halted their patrols, rebels paused in their trenches, and diplomats in foreign embassies leaned closer to their screens. But before the speech could begin, the storm struck dead as Traoré stepped into the courtyard, surrounded by his guards. Gunfire erupted. Muzzle flashes lit the morning, and the sound of bullets shattered the air. Betrayal had moved swiftly. Soldiers in his own uniform, bought and bribed, had turned their rifles against him. Chaos erupted in the palace. Loyalists returned fire, the echoes of gunshots ricocheting through the stone corridors. The smell of cordite and dust filled the air. Traoré himself moved with the calm precision of a soldier who had long accepted death as part of his oath. He drew his sidearm, his eyes scanning the chaos, not for survival, but for the betrayer. When the smoke cleared, bodies lay strewn across the courtyard, blood pooled between the cobblestones. And there, trembling with both fear and guilt, stood the general who had betrayed him. His weapon slipped from his grasp as Traoré's gaze locked onto him. The general fell to his knees. I had no choice. They promised me safety. They promised me wealth. You don't understand, Ibrahim. You cannot fight them. They are everywhere. They are everything. Traoré's eyes did not waver. And yet, here you are, begging for your life while your masters watch from afar. With a single motion, the general was disarmed and taken away. The attempted coup had failed, but the message was clear. The empire was no longer hiding its hand. It would strike openly now, unashamed, unrelenting. That evening, blood still drying on the palace stones, Ibrahim Traoré stood before the nation. His uniform was stained, his beret tilted defiantly, his face hardened by the fire he had just walked through. Cameras captured every detail. Microphones carried his words across borders, across continents, across oceans. He held up the document, the contract that tied the weapons to the American Defense Network. His hand did not tremble, his voice did not falter. For too long, my people have been told that their suffering is the fault of their own poverty, their own weakness, their own chaos. But today, I show you the truth. Our children starve while warehouses of weapons flow through our borders. Our villages burn while millions are spent to arm those who kill us. And those who claim to bring us aid are the same who plant knives in our backs. The crowd outside erupted in gasps, shouts, and cries. Across Africa, people leaned closer to their radios, their hearts pounding. Across the world, diplomats scrambled, phones rang, orders were barked in panic. This, Traoré declared, raising the document higher, is proof. $700 million worth of weapons, traced to networks tied to the United States. They call it business. I call it war. The silence that followed was heavy, global, unbreakable. This is not just about Burkina Faso. This is about Africa. How many decades must we bury our children before we realize the soil is poisoned by foreign hands? How many heroes must be killed before we understand that silence is complicity? I will not be silent. If this is my last breath, let it be the truth. The screen cut, the broadcast ended, but the world had already heard. The silence broke into chaos. Embassies flooded with calls, intelligence agencies scrambled, allies whispered, enemies plotted. The storm had been unleashed out in the palace courtyard. As the chants of the people echoed into the night, Ibrahim Traoré stood firm. He had spoken the unspeakable. He had defied the invisible empire. And though he knew the price would be heavy, he also knew the tide had turned. The climax had been reached. The truth was no longer hidden. The battle was no longer in shadows. The war was now in the open. The night after Traoré's broadcast, Ouagadougou did not sleep. The streets pulsed with restless energy, crowds chanting his name, women from balconies, young men waving flags in defiance. The people had seen something their grandparents never imagined. A leader standing before the world and exposing the empire that moved in shadows. For a brief moment, hope flared like a torch in the darkness. But in the corridors of power thousands of miles away, the reaction was immediate and merciless. In Washington, a room of men in suits sat in silence as the broadcast replayed on screens. No one spoke for a long while, until finally, a man with silver hair and tired eyes muttered, he wasn't supposed to survive the strike. Another leaned forward, his voice sharp. If this spreads, it won't stop with Burkina Faso. Others will rise. Mali, Niger, Congo, all of them. We cannot allow that spark to ignite. Orders were given, strategies were drawn, sanctions, economic sabotage, propaganda campaigns. The arsenal of empire was UNSHEATHED. In Paris, diplomats wrung their hands in panic. In London, editors debated how to frame the story without admitting too much. And across African capitals, presidents whispered among themselves, some inspired, others terrified. For Traoré, the storm began at dawn. The first blow was economic. Aid packages were suspended, accounts frozen, trade routes strangled. Overnight, the currency of Burkina Faso plummeted. Markets emptied, prices soared. Mothers clutched their children tighter as food became scarcer. It was a silent war, fought not with bullets but with hunger. The second blow was narrative. Western media outlets flooded the air with headlines. Burkina Faso leader spreads conspiracy theories. Unverified claims target U.S. amid rising tensions. Traoré risks starvation for his people with reckless speech. His proof was labeled propaganda. His defiance painted as madness. The same playbook that had erased Sankara, Lumumba, and Nkrumah was being wielded again. But this time, something different stirred. In Bamako, crowds poured into the streets carrying signs that read, "We stand with Traoré and Niamey soldiers." Painted his face on their barracks walls. In Kinshasa, students chanted his name as a symbol of resistance. Across Africa, the seeds of unity, long buried under decades of manipulation, began to break through the soil. Traoré saw it too. Inside, his palace still scarred from gunfire, he received messages smuggled across borders. Soldiers from neighboring countries pledged support. Youth movements declared solidarity. Even farmers from distant lands sent word, "We suffer the same. Do not give up." Yet the danger pressed closer. Drones buzzed over the capital at night, their hum a constant reminder that death could strike at any moment. Foreign mercenaries began appearing at border towns, their weapons modern, their loyalties for sale. Rebel groups that had been scattered now surged with newfound strength, emboldened by silent backers. And still, betrayal haunted the palace. A second attempt on his life nearly succeeded. A poisoned drink slipped into his chambers. Caught only because an aide noticed the cup had been switched. Every handshake, every meeting, every face became suspect. Through it all, Traoré wore his uniform and red beret, standing tall before his people. He addressed them nightly. His voice carried on radios into huts, villages, and markets. "They will starve us. They will call me a liar. They will try to kill me, but they cannot kill the truth. And they cannot kill Africa." The people listened. They endured. And slowly, resilience hardened into defiance. Meanwhile, in the great halls of global institutions, the pressure mounted. The IMF demanded repayment of debts that were never his people's to begin with. The UN called for dialogue while sidestepping the evidence he had laid bare. Analysts warned of instability, but none dared speak the real fear, that Africa might finally awaken. The arms plot, Traoré exposed, was no longer just about Burkina Faso. It was about the machinery of exploitation that had fed off the continent. For centuries, by revealing it, he had ripped open a wound the world preferred to keep hidden. That as weeks passed, the tension escalated. Burkina Faso became a fortress. Roads barricaded, soldiers stationed at every gate, fields patrolled not by farmers but by guards. The capital braced itself daily for an invasion that never came, though the threat never left. Then, something extraordinary happened. African leaders who had remained silent began to speak. One by one, voices emerged, cautious but firm. The president of Mali declared that an injury to Burkina is an injury to us all. Niger's leaders echoed the same. Even in distant Ethiopia and South Africa, murmurs of support reached his ears. For the first time in decades, Africa was not laughing at one of its sons, who dared to challenge empire. It was listening, and it was beginning to rise. The retaliation intensified. Western powers doubled down, trying to choke him into silence. Cyber attacks crippled Burkina Faso's communications. Foreign news outlets spread rumors of coup plots. Anonymous voices threatened him in the night. But Traoré did not bend. Instead, he prepared for the final act. He gathered his people in the largest square of Ouagadougou. Tens of thousands filled the air with chants, their bodies pressed together, their voices rising like thunder. Cameras streamed the gathering across the world. He stood before them, his red beret catching the sun, his eyes burning with defiance. He did not read from a paper. He did not look at notes. He spoke as a soldier, as a son of Africa, as a man who had chosen truth over survival. They said Sankara was mad. They said Lumumba was reckless. They said every African who dreamed of freedom was doomed to fail. But today, I tell you this, the age of fear is ending. We will not bow. We will not break. We will not sell our dignity for dollars soaked in blood. Let the world hear us. Africa will rise. The square erupted. The chants echoed across borders, across rivers, across deserts. And in that moment, Traoré was no longer just a president. He was a symbol, a spark, a possibility. But even as the people celebrated, he knew the battle was far from over. The empire was not defeated. It was watching, waiting, planning its next move. And the cost of defiance was yet to be paid. The square of Ouagadougou still echoed with chants long after the speech ended, their rhythm rolling through the night like drums of destiny. But when the sun rose the next day, the world was different. What Ibrahim Traoré had done could not be undone. He had dragged secrets worth billions into the light, and now every nation, every diplomat, every journalist had to choose silence, denial, or truth. The retaliation was swift. Washington issued a statement calling his claims baseless, disinformation. Paris demanded an international inquiry, carefully avoiding mention of the documents he displayed. Newspapers across Europe debated whether Traoré was a hero or a reckless young soldier destabilizing the continent. Some called him the new Sankara, others painted him as a dangerous populist. The battle was no longer just in Burkina Faso soil, it was in the realm of perception, where narratives shaped reality. But in Africa, perception was already shifting. In Mali, a mural appeared overnight, Traoré painted in his military uniform and red beret, holding a torch above a crowd of Africans breaking their chains. In Niger, protesters stormed a foreign embassy, chanting his name. In Ghana, university students held vigils, reading aloud his speech by candlelight. In Kinshasa, a singer released a song declaring, "The truth is a weapon too." Burkina Faso itself became both fortress and beacon. Aid money was cut, food prices rose, and the IMF pressed harder, demanding repayment of debts. But the people, instead of breaking, endured. Farmers shared what little they had with neighbors. Women organized community kitchens in the villages. Soldiers patrolled not as enforcers, but as protectors. Hunger was real, pain was deep, but the spirit of resistance was deeper still. Inside the palace, Traoré bore the weight of both hope and danger. Each morning, intelligence briefings warned him of assassination plots, mercenary incursions, cyber attacks designed to cripple the nation. Each night, he lay awake, wondering if the next sunrise would be his last. He knew too well the fate of African leaders who had walked this road before him, and yet, each morning, he placed the red beret on his head, fastened his uniform, and stepped forward. To show fear was to surrender. The global system tightened its noose. Banks closed Burkina Faso's accounts. Shipping companies refused to dock at its ports. Flights were canceled, borders closed, medicine shortages began to spread. It was a siege without bombs, a war without open armies, the empire's most dangerous weapon. But the empire underestimated the power of a story. Traoré's speech had been recorded, copied, and smuggled far beyond Burkina Faso. It was whispered, in refugee camps, played on radios in distant villages, uploaded on hidden networks that evaded censorship. Even in the diaspora, Africans in Paris, London, and New York marched in solidarity, holding signs that read, $700 million in weapons, $0 in bread. Pressure mounted in ways the empire had not anticipated. Journalists, once cautious, began digging. A leaked memo surfaced from a defense contractor, its contents eerily close to what Traoré had revealed. A whistleblower in Europe came forward, claiming he had seen shipment records that matched the timeline of the weapons plot. What had once been dismissed as conspiracy now looked like exposure, and the world began to ask questions it had long avoided. By the third month after his revelation, sanctions had crippled Burkina Faso's economy. Food queues stretched for blocks, fuel was rationed, children fainted in schools from hunger. Yet instead of turning against him, the people rallied closer. They painted slogans on the walls, better to starve free than eat in chains. They carried his image through markets, villages, and towns, not as a politician, but as a symbol of defiance. It was then that African leaders began to meet, secretly at first, in small rooms with drawn curtains, then openly, as pressure from their people grew. Mali, Niger, Guinea, and even distant allies began forming what they called the new Pan-African Front. For the first time in decades, the continent was speaking not as fractured states, but as one body with one wound. The empire struck harder. A drone strike leveled a border outpost. Foreign mercenaries attempted another coup, this time with precision and planning. But Traoré had learned from history. He moved swiftly, purging traitors, tightening defenses, and arming loyal units with whatever weapons they could capture. Still, the toll was immense. Burkina Faso bled not only in lives, but in hope. Hunger grew worse. Hospitals ran out of medicine, and whispers of despair threatened to spread. Traoré knew he had bought his nation time, but not victory. Victory would require more than defiance. It would require a transformation so great that it could not be silenced, even if he were killed. So he turned his focus to legacy. He gathered his closest advisors, not to speak of war, but of vision. If I fall tomorrow, he told them, the truth must not fall with me. We must plant it in the soil, in the schools, in the voices of our children. They can kill a man, but they cannot kill a generation. From that moment, community radios played lessons of history, teaching children the names of those who had resisted before. Farmers were taught not just how to grow food, but how to organize together. Soldiers were reminded that they were not the tools of empire, but the guardians of their people. It was not just resistance, it was preparation for a future beyond him. And slowly, the world began to shift. A journalist in South America published an expose linking the arms plot to offshore accounts. Protests erupted in Europe, not just by Africans, but by ordinary citizens, outraged at their government's duplicity. In the United States itself, a senator demanded an inquiry, his voice drowned in politics but still echoing across headlines. The empire was no longer in control of the narrative. The cracks had begun to spread. Months turned into a year. Burkina Faso still struggled, still bled, but it had not broken. Its people had tasted dignity, and dignity was stronger than fear. And across Africa, movements born from his defiance began to grow. Students marched with Sankara's face alongside Traoré's. Workers demanded independence from foreign contracts. Soldiers swore oaths not to generals in distant capitals, but to the soil beneath their feet. The storm that had begun as a revelation, about $700 million in weapons, had become something larger, a fire across a continent long denied its own flame. And then came the question that echoed not just in Africa, but across the world. Was this the moment Africa finally broke its chains? No one could answer, not yet. The struggle was far from over, and the empire still had claws sharp enough to tear nations apart. But in the eyes of millions, something had changed forever. Fear had shifted, power had been named, and a soldier in a red beret had shown that truth, even whispered in a fragile nation, could echo louder than the roar of empires. As the sun set over Ouagadougou, painting the sky in colors of fire and blood, Ibrahim Traoré stood on the balcony of his palace, watching the city below. Children played in the streets despite their hunger. Women shared food in clay bowls despite their scarcity. Men repaired walls, broken by bullets, refusing to let ruins become their legacy. He knew the dangers still loomed. He knew death could come at any moment. But he also knew something greater. He had already won in the one place. Empires could never conquer the human spirit, and as the night deepened, drums rose from the distance, steady and unyielding. They were not just drums of celebration, nor of mourning. They were the drums of a continent waking, step by step, breath by breath. Ibrahim Traoré listened, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled.